The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, welcome. It's just me here today. I am Dane. Philip Ong is on vacation and I'll be taking over for his spot today, but we have a little bit something different. There's not a lot going on with the volcanoes right now. Kilauea and Mauna Loa is quiet. We're going to get into an update on those, but this time I want to talk a little bit more about history and something that we normally don't delve into exactly, and that would be the bombing runs of Mauna Loa in 1935 and then in 1942. We're going to talk about some of the history of that, and I have some neat little tidbits and things like that I was able to scrounge up to share with you today. And I hope it's interesting enough, and we'll be back to the more diving into the scientific papers and things along those lines when Philip gets back. All right, so we're going to do the volcano summary on Kilauea first, and then we're going to go into Mauna Loa. It's going to be pretty brief, and then we'll just dive into some of the fun stuff. All right. So this is your Hawaiian volcano summary for the week. And right now, Kilauea is quiet. The eruption is paused. Kilauea is not erupting. All eruptive activity that happened in those 2 weeks, a couple weeks ago, those were all confined within the caldera. There's no indication that it's intruding into either of the rift zones. Right now, the SO2 rate, we have a new SO2 measurement. It's down to 160 tons per day from 175 tons per day. And that was taken on June 22nd. They also indicate that there is no indication of the rift zones having any unusual activity. There's steady rates of ground deformation and seismicity along both, kind of expected on those fairly active rift zones. We did have one thing that was shared. This is kind of the most interesting thing of the week. Is last week we were talking about the potential for ooze-ups, or this magma coming to the surface again, lava being seen and creating a little bit of temporary glow. And we were talking about how that was not indicative of the eruption resuming. Let me make sure everything's good on the stream real quick. But yeah, this little ooze up occurred, and that's kind of expected. We've seen them over the previous eruptions. That doesn't indicate that any eruptive activity is happening. All right, we look good there. And it's kind of the expected after these eruptions end. I thought we'd see a little bit more of it, but hey, we got one. And this was spotted on June 22nd, so after the eruption ended, and we can see that small little ooze up on the thermal imagery. And we caught a couple of them at night as well. Jennifer, one of our contributors, was able to capture and share one of those little glow spots that emerged in the middle of the night. So we appreciate that. Moving on to the data, past week on Kilauea, we see that the lava lake has been mostly steady, but then we have a little drop, and that seems to coincide with a little bit of a deflationary event that we have going on that picked up a few days ago, or a couple days ago, or yesterday, sorry. And this deflationary event seems like it might be a DI cycle of some sorts, where we had the beginnings of the DI, but we haven't fully gotten into it yet. All right. So yeah, the data, there's not a whole lot going on in the data, really. Low seismicity, low SO2, low deflation. We're basically at the end of that eruption, and we're in that repose period now. And we've seen this for the past couple of eruptions up there, past 3 or 4 eruptions up there now, where we go in, it ends, and we go into a period of recharge, essentially, and then we start playing where we got the DI cycles coming in, and then when it starts to build pressure, we eventually get to the point where that pressure tries to make it to the surface, and it either readjusts in the ground, finds a place for magma to accumulate without erupting, makes an intrusion, which is like an eruption underground that doesn't make it to the surface, or erupts it again. And all of those are in the wheelhouse before the end of the year, essentially. All right, looking at Mauna Loa now, we have some data streams coming from that. And really, it's not much is happening up on Mauna Loa. Most of the data streams are kind of offline right now. The real one that we have that we're paying attention to is the seismicity, which is incredibly low. It's so low, in fact, that USGS has Mauna Loa at green and normal, which indicates that it's at background levels of activity. And we do have a volcano watch. Just want to highlight this while we're here as well. And this one was talking about the measurements of carbon dioxide that the USGS was trying to conduct during the Mauna Loa eruption, but within 10 minutes of the eruption starting, their equipment had been wiped out. So now they're trying again. They're going to position it into a better spot. And this idea of gathering this information on the SO2 really is on the CO2 is really for being able to detect the changes in eruptive activity. There's some indication that they might be able to predict, but it's really more about afterwards. You can see the release of the CO2. So this is the newest USGS Volcano Watch. If you want to check that out, it is on the USGS website. And that will be our Hawaiian Volcano summary for the week. All right, so yeah, there's really not a whole lot going on these things. As of right now, we are just kind of waiting to see if anything further is going to happen in terms of the eruption picking back up and unpausing. We still need to technically go those 3 months, but it's so technical in there as to what is or what does not constitute a new eruption that I'm not going to make. If it were to pop back up today, I wouldn't make any determinations. We'd have to wait for USGS to call that, because it's super intricate as to what signifies a new eruption. And the thing is like when volcanologists look back in 10 years, they'll probably recategorize all of these things and change up how the connections between them and stuff like that, where we were at the time not seeing the forest through the trees as much. All right, so now do something a little bit different. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. Hopefully be able to do it within 45 minutes. But wanted to start with talking about the bombings of Mauna Loa. So in 1935, there was a attempted diversion by the U.S. Army, and they used a bunch of bombs to bomb the eruption site. So we're going to go through that one. They did it again in 42. It's a whole story, so let's begin that. But first, we got to start off in 1934. 1934, we have Kilauea erupting inside the caldera. And right now, there's going to be a lot of I'm going to be setting up a lot of parallels to the 2018 eruption. Sorry, the 2022 eruption of Mauna Loa, where Mauna Loa erupted at the summit, then moved to the northeast rift zone, where it proceeded to make its way down slope and semi towards Hilo into the saddle first, and then we were worried if it would go towards Hilo. But we have this summit eruption at Kilauea, similar to the way we did leading into the 2022 eruption. And right here, this parking lot, this is the one that you see on the down drop block, I believe, that it was collapsed in 2018 with the caldera. So before the eruption even begins, we have a few things. So first, in the U.S. military presence in Hawaii, it was not. It existed before statehood, well before statehood, and one of the first documented military projects was when, in 1840, a 5-day expedition by the U.S. Navy, led by Charles Wilkes, was exploring the Mauna Loa summit, and their goal was to be able to establish a station at the Pendulum Peak near the summit and also try and measure the height of the mountain. So they continued on in 1923. General Charles Summerall, commander of Hawaiian Department, requested construction of an airfield inside the national park. The park superintendent at the time, Thomas Boyle, proposed that the approved construction was a landing field south of Halemaumau Crater, so he's putting it inside the park, close to the eruptive vent. Surprise, surprise, within a year, the area was damaged beyond repair due to an eruptive event. So that's what happens kind of when you put that airfield near the caldera. So they built another one, and they built it in 1925, Bowles Field, which was closer to KMC, and it could be used by military personnel there. That was the whole goal. Now, the thing we're building up into, at this point, the U.S. military kind of takes what they want and does what they want, but yeah, that's going to get worse. When we get towards to World War II, closer to it, the military is going to start doing a lot more things. So as the build-up to the war increased, defense spending became priority, and the parks were essentially viewed as good places for training areas and defensive sites. The resources were seen as available and exploitable. So we had then one of my favorite guys we're still building up into the 35 eruption. One of my favorite guys, we're going to talk about him a few times, is Edward Wingate. He is appointed superintendent of the park, the national park, in 1933, and he held that post for 13 years. So throughout World War II, he's going to be the park superintendent, and he's going to become a central person in this whole thing. All right, so now we can start getting into the eruption, right? So like all summit, or like the vast majority of Mauna Loa eruptions, it started in the summit caldera, and within a day it moved into the rift zone. It moved into the northeast rift zone on this one. And we can see some of the photos, I don't know exactly how you would say this. It looks like it's been modified in previous centuries Photoshop, but hey, it gives the idea, kind of looking across the Hilo Bay, looking at Old Town Hilo up the hill towards Mauna Loa. And we get to see that this, now I'm going to pull up a map here real quick. We're going to alternate over. And there's a lot going on this map right here, but we're going to try and make a little sense of it. Mute. Sorry. All right. So this is a map of all the eruptions in the past 750 years on Mauna Loa, and we can see that there is a lot going on here. So we're going to reduce it down a little bit and make this a little bit simpler, and we're just going to look at... We're just going to look at this orange one here, which is 1935, and we can assume that... You got a barking dog. this is 1935 here, and we can assume that it extends up into the rift zone, but it kind of gets chaotic. But when we cut it out, we can see really exactly where this lava flow came down once it did erupt and got into the rift zone. And we see here this lighter lava flow layer. This is the 2022 eruption. So we can see how they, even though they took very similar trajectories, these ended up being very different flows, whereas 1935 ended up coming down, making it to the saddle. That was the big question we were having in 2022. Would it reach the saddle or not? This one did, and not only that, it continued along the saddle for miles before kicking off of it. And what it's doing here is it's starting to try and make its way down to the river systems of Hilo, the watersheds above Hilo that feed all the rivers going down. And let me show those real quick. Right, so you can see some of these steepest descent lines. They show some of the riverbeds. They trace them really well. And what the most likely areas for the lava to move through. All right, so that's the map and what we're looking at. And this is a photo of it. So this is looking from Mauna Loa, or from Mauna Kea, looking across the saddle, and we see Pu'uhuluhulu over here. And that was where this is where a lot of the viewing and the images from the 2022 eruption were being taken. This eruption again just got a lot further down the slope. Very similar though. The main thing is that unlike the 2022 eruption, which was predominantly an front, and when it came down, it made this big blob once it got to the flat spot, and it continued to get bigger and wider. This one was a Pahoehoe flow. It was able to create lava tubes, and then those tubes were able to better move the lava down slope and continue to carry it towards the Hilo, essentially. So here we have a photo from 1935. And we got another one from on the ground. And to me, they're saying Pahoehoe, it has a lot of characteristics to it, but for it to be able to get that far, it makes sense for it to be a Pahoehoe dominant flow. And this just looks like an front right here. We have the crumbly rocks and looking out in the vegetation from 1935. Really does look like an front there, but it can set up those Pahoehoe channels behind. So now we get into the military operation. At this point, Thomas Jagger who is the founder of the USGS HVO, which has been established just a few years prior to this eruption. So Dr. Thomas Jagger, the founder, still there, and he ends up being concerned about the watersheds leading into Hilo. Those watersheds are very valuable for the survival of the town, and he figured once it got into the lava shed or watershed, it would turn into a lava shed, and the lava would continue down and alter the way in which the town was receiving water, similar to the 1880-1881 eruption, which did get much further than any other eruptions in modern history into Hilo. So he called on the U.S. Army Air Corps, particularly the 23 Bombardment Battalion and the 72nd Test and Evaluation Squadron to conduct a bombing operation. So with the blessing of General Patton, who oversaw the operation, these Keystone B-3 single prop planes are double props, I believe. But anyways, these dual wing planes were set up to do a bombing run, and their goal was to drop Mark 1 600-pound TNT bombs, which were really 300 pounds of TNT, and essentially destroy the lava channel walls and destroy the feed that it was allowing the lava to proceed so far down slope. The idea would be to reset the lava flow and buy time, because it would have to essentially come down again beside the eruption, beside the lava flow that just existed. Let's go back to the map. So if you were to knock out, the idea would be if you were to knock out the lava channel in here, it would have to reset and make a new lava channel that would go alongside this one, but you would buy yourself time. And they really did this one. They were trying to do it up at the 8,000 foot elevation level. So they're trying to do it decently far up the hill to buy themselves a good amount of time if it were to reset. That's in theory what they were going for. Now, the problems. Problem one, World War II, pre-World War II bombing is incredibly inaccurate. We're talking a lucky to hit a city type of situation. Now, so right now we're setting up for a bombing situation. We are preparing for this run that has been blessed by General Patton, oversaw by Thomas Jagger. They go out with the 72nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, and they do the evaluations of where the bomb sites are going to be, and eventually they launch the mission. They launch with after putting these Mark I bombs onto the planes. This is pretty hectic days back then. They went and flew the mission. And the real thing about this is, you know, if you think of the military bombing accuracy back in the day, the reason why a lot of those bombers were terribly inaccurate was primarily to do with the anti-air defense systems of the opposition. You can't fly low because you're going to get all your bombers shot down. So you got to fly high and drop and hope and pray, essentially. That was the old school bombing, what they were forced to do. And they couldn't even fly in the day. They tried. They got beat up so bad that they went to night flights in World War II only. Both sides, the U.S. and the British did. Those night flights still just horribly inaccurate. But here we don't have shooting back, right? So they're able to get pretty low compared to what they would be doing. So they're more accurate than your traditional World War II bombing run. But they're not that accurate. And even at the time, Wingate, the head of the national park, the superintendent, he cast doubt on the idea. His plan, he said, if we're going to go and divert this thing, I'd rather we go out on foot and place charges exactly where we want to place charges instead of leaving it up to the inaccuracy of these bombers. The pilots themselves agreed with Wingate and even questioned the results of this mission after it was conducted. So Dr. Jagger and Roy Finch were the main people at HVO. And the thing is at HVO at this point, they're just coming out of the recession, so they've had their budget cut to like $6,000 a year. And only Dr. Jagger and one other person, it might be Finch, are able to stay on the roll. Everything else is being financed by I can't remember the name of it, but it was like basically Friends of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, or Hawaii, similar, but for the USGS. And they tried to help fund the salaries of staff at the observatory because they were just cut to nothing, essentially. So they oversaw this whole thing to divert the flows. And this operation took place on December 27, 1935. 5 bombers made the run. 20 bombs were dropped. They dropped these Mark I's, and then they dropped 20. I don't even know what they're pointer bombs. They're black powder charges, essentially. I don't even know what they're for. I mean, it seems like it's almost cosmetic at that point. But that's what they dropped. They claimed wild success, right? The U.S. military, Dr. Jagger, immediately as it happened, and the days afterwards, blinding success, no question about it. However, there were others that questioned this, including geologist Howard Stearns, who was a part of the operation. He was on board one of the bombers. And in his estimation, the eruption ending, which ended a few days after the bombing run, I believe maybe 6 days afterwards. Yeah, 6 days after the bombing run, the eruption ceased. He was saying that that's purely coincidental. And if we know from 2022, if we look at the duration of that eruption, it was about 2 weeks. In this eruption, it was about 2 weeks. 1942, it was about 2 weeks. And they're all going to be essentially the same pattern on this one. It's not going to be breaking out and doing weird things. This is kind of the standard Mauna Loa eruption on the Northeast Rift Zone. Pretty standard stuff. But, Dr. Jagger wanted to show off a little bit. And I don't know if this was his vanity project, but we got to bomb the thing. and we bombed the thing, claimed wild success on it. Here you can see the eruption coming down the hill of Mauna Loa with a little bit of snow cap up above at the summit. Very similar to 2022. And here we have the bombing run, right? The impact of these bombs on the ground. They claim that a lot of these bombs were hits, even ones that destroyed the wall of the channel. And even Wingate gave Dr. Jagger a bone when he said you showed that the ability to destroy a channel wall to make the lava come out of the channel and reform a channel is possible. But the ending of the lava flow, to say that you saved Hilo or anything like that, as the military claimed, and which will feed into the 1942 bombing run, much of that is unsubstantiated, and it seems like it was everybody patting themselves on the back, essentially. And instead of the real analysis, which Dr. Jagger went back up to the sites of these impacts later and claimed that, oh, look, you can see the came out of the side where the impact was, and this created viscosity that plugged up the lava channel and saved Hilo that way. The geologist that went back there later was like, we don't see any of this stuff. We don't know what you're talking about. And there's been a lot of question on that in terms of the way it's portrayed. So this is the way the military essentially portrays it, and I have a little box here highlighted. The bombers had been spot on in their attack, and the magma flow began to slow. It ceased altogether within a few days, and Hilo was saved from being wiped off the map. Jagger was pleased with the results and thanked the Army Air Corps for their efforts. The Army, on one day's work, has stopped a lava flow which might have continued indefinitely and caused incalculable damage to the forest, water, resources, and city. He stated in the Army Air Corps newsletter, January 15th, 1936. So this was how it was portrayed. Blinding success. And even this continued indefinite, it might have continued indefinitely. I mean, not even Pu'uo'o, which lasted 35 years, erupted indefinitely. Right? We know they're all going to change. All eruptions are temporary, and it just waiting for the next one, essentially, waiting for some change to come. All right, so then USGS, right? The other side of this thing. And USGS here says, and this was in one of the volcano watches. They've done a few volcano watches on this subject. It's an interesting subject, so it's always worth, going back and talking about again. Even as it unfolded, many were skeptical. Jagger's boss, Hawaiian National Park Superintendent Edward Wingate, planned to send explosives to the target area via land because he didn't believe aerial bombing would be accurate. The Army pilots doubted the bombs would have much effect on the active lava channel, and after dropping them, remained unconvinced. Regarding the success or failure of explosives to influence the 1935 eruption, our view is that bombing was carried out as the eruption was already waning. Bombing did not start a new flow at the source as Jagger originally hoped. The Humu'ulu flow did not cease abruptly after bombing, but died slowly after the following week. The 1970s investigation confirmed no thickening of the lava vent by bombs, as Jagger claimed. So this is still a topic of debate. Did 1935 do anything? Did it not? I think it did a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. They probably did damage that wall. They probably did get a temporary flow to break out of the channel. It seems that in the history that I'm reading, there's enough reference of that to say something happened. But what they're claiming, as in this blinding success, there's no chance in that to me. These eruptions, they go 2 weeks roughly, right? So if you bomb on day 11 and it ends on day 14, how can you say you did anything? Even if it stops almost. You'd have to have some very predefined things that you were looking for and then hit all those check boxes before you even did it. To be able to say when you did it, yes, this is what we expected, this was within our predictions, but we don't have any of that. And here we have one of the bombs that did not go off. This is embedded up there, and every once in a while, somebody will go up on Mauna Loa and find this thing, take new pictures. Like, oh my God, guys, there's a UXO. But this one was photographed by John Lockwood in 1970, I believe. Now, the 23 Bombardment Squadron is kind of interesting. This is their patch, right? So you can see bombs flying into an active volcano. So the natural thing to think was, okay, so they commemorated the bombing run that they conducted, and they made their patch, for that. Wrong. They made this patch in 1931, years before the bombing run was ever done. It was foreshadowing almost what would transpire. They made this patch due to their proximity to the volcano. I don't think anybody knew that this would be the case one day for their squadron. But here we go. That's their patch. And now this brings us to 1942. So first thing we got to mention is December 7th, 1941, a day that will be remembered in infamy. The attack on Pearl Harbor, the thrusting into the war, and everything that comes along with it, right? So Pearl Harbor happens, and immediately afterwards, the drafts are drawn up to impose martial law and have absolute rule by the military governor. And there were stringent rules that were put in place, including the prohibition of liquor sales, no street lights to prevent the enemy from being able to see cities with aircraft, and even the blocking out of shoreline access and the installation of barbed wire to prevent even locals from using the shorelines. For shoreline photography was prohibited, and trenches were dug, home guards were set up. It was everybody on bear. The governor, essentially, once military power was established, issued an evacuation order for non-essential personnel to leave the islands. So the dependents of the military personnel, the wives and the kids, went back to the mainland. And the idea was, oh, if you don't want to be in Hawaii, you shouldn't be here, type of thing. But then it created a sense of, well, if you're leaving, you're a coward. How are you ever going to come back and face the people that stayed when you ran and you didn't defend Hawaii? So a lot of people ended up staying, and a lot of people ended up joining the Home Guard or supporting services that worked around the war effort. Now, this also included a lot of censorship, and that's going to play big into 1942 because the war is fully on, and the censorship committees, these guys are reading letters and preventing the publication in the newspapers of certain pieces of information. There's a whole big push against rumors, sabotaging the war effort. So this is part of what plays into the 1942 eruption. The other thing they did was they issued their own currency for Hawaii, the idea being that if Hawaii was eventually invaded, the Japanese wouldn't be able to go to the bank and grab U.S. dollars and be able to use them. If Hawaii were to fall, then the money in Hawaii would be marked Hawaii, or the vast majority of it, and then that money would be able to be voided easily and distinguished between the currency in circulation on the mainland. So here we're looking at the Kilauea, or the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, essentially up at Kilauea, around the summit. So right in the middle here is the summit caldera. You can see this little circle here. This is Halemaumau. And here we have what the military had built up leading into World War II. And they controlled a vast amount of land. And in it, they had set up multiple bombing ranges. And were using the park in large part as they saw fit. The only person that would stand against them was Superintendent Wingate. And Wingate demonstrated multiple times that he would not be intimidated by the military. He was not intimidated under martial law. The first thing that he did, that he encountered, he was on the board of, I can't remember, supervisors or some committee in Puna to help govern. And he got an order under martial law to restrict those of Japanese descent from positions in the Home Guard. And he was the only person, or Puna was the only district in Hawaii to ignore the order completely and just continue doing what they were doing. And that was a lot to do with Wingate's ability to stand up to the military almost unilaterally. So the problem is that even through the negotiations and getting the military to agree that they would stay within select areas and they would try and work with the park in more of a hand-wavy fashion, he was largely ignored. And even though they set up these areas where they said, these are the bombing ranges, they would get well outside of those ranges. and they would do things that would hamper park service in general, like park personnel would find tripwires and unexploded ordnances on trails inside the park. At one point, the military aircraft dropped a bomb on the sulfur bluffs, I believe it was, of the caldera of Kilauea, completely outside the designated impact area, right? And they just did whatever they wanted back then, essentially. And very, very few people were in any kind of position to stop them. Including the setup of a concentration camp, right? So KMC at Building 34 was set up as an internment camp for Japanese Americans on the island. And this would, I think there was the FBI went out, I don't have the source for this one, but they went out within the first few weeks of the Pearl Harbor attack and rounded up, I think it was 60-something Japanese locals and brought them up to KMC to intern them there. And they had surrounded by guard towers, machine gun outposts. I mean, it was a full camp setup. And even local Japanese farmers who were working with the national park had their contracts canceled and later were interned themselves, right? So Wingate ended up finding a way to, I don't have this source up, to make it so the park, or so the military had to move those that internment personnel to Oahu, I believe it was. But it was very tense. And the problem with a lot of this stuff is it was classified information at the time, and a giant trove of this stuff got lost. So there's a whole bunch of black areas in the history on certain things, not this one in particular, but in just World War II history on Hawaii Island, you'll find all kinds of black spots where what happened here, something happened, right? And you can't find any documentation of it existing, even though it's right in front of you. So the military is going full bore at this point, and boom, 1942, we have the eruption. And this footage, it wasn't released because this was the secret eruption. This was the eruption that we couldn't let the Japanese know was happening. The problem that the U.S. military saw at the time is that this thing is going to act as a giant beacon set up on top of the biggest mountain in the Pacific to just sign to the Japanese where the easiest place to invade, to make a breachhead and establish a position on Hawaii, the easiest place for that, the most opportune place for that. And there was real fear. That's the thing that a lot of people don't get, is the context of fear that was happening. So you remember 2020, with COVID and everybody rushing to the store to grab all the toilet paper and stuff like that. That was nothing compared to the runs on the stores after Pearl Harbor, the point where the stores were out of food. People were panicked. The idea that the Japanese could invade was very real at the time. The ability to, until Midway happened, the force calculation was, we figured the Japanese were very strong in their naval forces. Is it out of the question looking back that they could have done an invasion? Maybe. But we didn't know that at the time. And the military personnel were discussing things along the lines of, could the Japanese drop infected fleas and spread plague that way? Things along those lines. Seems outlandish, but on the backs of Pearl Harbor, there was a whole bunch of things that seemed outlandish before that now seemed more realistic and were driven by fear. So this footage wasn't released. Nobody really knew about the eruption going on. And right now we're just looking at one of this 2,000-foot long fissure line, a very long line of fissures that had formed on the northeast rift zone of Mauna Loa during the eruption and drove these lava flows. Now, the one thing about this eruption is the previous one, 1935, as well as the 2022 eruption of Mauna Loa, these were higher up on the northeast rift zone. 1942, I'm going to pause real quick and just bring up the map so you can see it. This yellow right here is 42, right? So it takes a more direct line towards Hilo. And this is very close, very, very close to this right here. And this one would, not that one. this right here, which would be the 1984 eruption. So this 1942 was similar to 1984 in many ways. All right, back to the video. And Mauna Loa eruptions, they're quite vigorous in the beginning. Put down a lot of lava, move down slope rather quickly, and then they slow once they hit the flatter areas of the slope, especially on the Hilo side. Hilo side eruptions are kind of known for that. They'll go quick, they'll be fast, then they'll hit that flats before above Hilo, and really slow down at that point. And that's really where the eruption like 1880, 1881 would stand out, because it got past it got much further down slope than the majority of the Northeast Rift Zone eruptions, even if they are relatively decently down slope to start off with. The vent location is. So yeah, this is, I mean, I forgot about this footage in a large part. I remember there was something, but this is actually good color footage, 1942. And we're not going to see anything on the bombing run on this one. These guys went up there on, pack mules and on foot, and they were able to capture this footage. Really impressive stuff for the time, especially. Even today, this would be, great shots to be able to get up that close. And we have seen people do this, but it's mostly USGS that are able to do that now, and they don't walk, they fly. They take a helicopter up, and David Okita, the talented helicopter pilot, lands, and they're able to get out and do their thing, get a pickup on the way out. Really convenient. But I'm just going to continue to let this play a little bit. This eruption is really standard for Mauna Loa, but the time period in which it exists makes it completely chaotic for the personnel trying to deal with it. Right. So here we have the lava flows moving down slope. These look like the 2022 eruption and many of the other eruptions previously on Mauna Loa. This one didn't really establish the tube systems that we saw that was driving the 1935. This is more standard. We have a lava channel there feeding with probably multiple lava channels. It's hard to tell without an aerial shot. But lava channel feeding down slope, and it's got a couple dozen miles to try and threaten anything, really. And that looks like a lot of pohoi in there to me, and that does look like a flow front even. You can see it might be a breakout of the lava channel though. Yes, as Lou brings up, Ben Hayes, a park ranger at the National Park, did a presentation for After Dark on the park on the Battle of Midway about a month ago. That was really good, had a bunch of information in there. Would recommend watching that on Two Pineapples channels. They have a recording of that one. Definitely worth checking out. If this interests you, that will probably interest you as well. So we have a lot of shots of the volcano. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Just a full film day up there, and this is all footage again that wasn't really released. Let's skip ahead to the night, and this is really what they were fearing was the night. At night, this thing turns into a giant beacon that can be seen from hundreds of miles around. Just the glow off of the clouds that something is there, and is only going to get brighter the closer you get to it. We have some helicopter shots of this line of fissures, which is standard for Mauna Loa. We get a very long line of fissures, and they can consolidate into one more active vent like in 2022, but this is the long line of fissures being active. That's been seen throughout. We now at this point we're later on into the eruption, they must have come back, so we have more spatter cones built up. All these ramparts that are being built up gradually the longer the eruption proceeds. and as long as the eruptive vents are high enough to shoot that material to be able to pile up. Just skipping through a little bit. Very reminiscent of the old footage, but yep, that's 1942, the lava flow that they were dealing with, right? And the glow is the main thing that they are concerned about at this point in time. And this falls on a new general that is entering the scene. This is the general that drew up the martial law plans, General Greene. Now, General Greene ends up getting tasked with this to deal with the lava flow that's now making its way towards Hilo. Here we are, probably in a aircraft of some kind, looking up towards Mauna Kea, and we see the lava flow progressing through the vegetation there. It'd be going down towards Hilo, which would be off screen to the right. And this is to get this, I went into the Major Greene's, basically his own memoirs from that period. So we're looking at Pearl Harbor immediately after. We're looking really at 1942 to see what he was doing in those few years there. And I'm going to read this for you because this was pretty important to the thing. So in 1942, in addition to all of our current troubles, Mauna Loa began to erupt, and it was not long before we were assured that Madame Pele was in a tantrum of the most serious kind. While this matter was of paramount importance to the people of the area of Hilo, the whole territory became interested in the outcome. Now the military governor was up against Madame Pele, and what was the military governor going to do about that? That was the burning question of the day. It devolved to me to take action. Research disclosed that the volcano had been bombed in 1935 under somewhat similar circumstances. I arranged for a constant report on the progress and direction of the lava flow. The Signal Corps made some excellent night photographs of the flow at great risk to the personnel. It became a question of determining when the appropriate time for bombing arrived. Prior reports indicated that 5 flyers had successfully diverted the flow in 1935. It occurred to me that General Emmons might have personal knowledge of the matter, as he had served in the Hawaii during that period. I had all the data ready for the decision at the time of the bombing. One morning he arrived at my office and studied the reports carefully for some time, and then decided the next day would be the appropriate time if the lava continued at its present course. It occurred to me that the view of this fact, that he seemed to have special knowledge concerning the matter, that he might have taken part in the bombing in 1935. As near as I can call our conversation on the subject, it went substantially as follows. And in this one, I took the conversation, had AI make it up for you guys, so you can maybe, this is the conversation between General Greene and General Emmons that transpired. It's pretty special. I couldn't believe finding this thing.
By the way, General, you were out here in the Air Force in 1935. By any chance did you take part in the bombing of the goddess Pele?
I sure did, and it was not by any chance either. It was upon direct orders, as it was a dangerous mission. I will always remember it, as it was like flying inside a fiery furnace. 5 of us in separate bombers made the run. I was sitting on top of the gas tank expecting it to explode any minute. I was scared as hell.
Didn't you know of the legend that anyone who interferes with the goddess Pele when she is erupting must feed her or meet a violent death?
Sure I did. Everyone knows about that, and I did something about it. After we came in from the run, I made another with a passenger, a small pig that I bought. When I was over the center of the crater, I dumped him out. It was the meanest thing I ever did, and I can still remember the poor devil's screams as he catapulted below.
Did the other flyers do likewise?
No. They gave me the horse laugh. That is all there is to it, and I am not telling you any more. You are too inquisitive anyway.
Just a minute. You cannot leave me in the air like that. How many of the 5 flyers are now living?
I suppose you will have to know, or you will annoy me forever. I am the only one left.
I never thought you were superstitious, General Emmons. Are you?
No, I am not. I am just damn careful, and in this instance it paid off.
pretty crazy stuff. So General Emmons was in 1935. He was one of the crew going on the bombing run, one of the pilots, and then he landed the plane, went back with a pig he had bought, threw the pig out as a sacrifice to Pele, and then everybody that didn't is dead by 1945 or 42. Everybody that participated in the mission, all the pilots that didn't do that, they're gone. So it just a complete interesting piece of information, and shows kind of the mindset in terms of them trying to figure out what the local perception was, because General Green was saying he's never, in his memoir, he was saying he never seen a belief held as tightly as the Hawaiians held on to the beliefs around Pele and her wrath and her judgment and how you would have to appease her to do anything, and that dominated a lot of his discussions, as you can see here, and really interesting stuff. And I just had to bring that a little bit to life for you guys, because I just couldn't leave it to a page and have me read it. So they ran the mission, right? B-18s. B-18s were kind of a failed bomber aircraft, and they were positioned in Hawaii just as a place for them to be so they could do some things that weren't completely useless. So they ran this run. It was easy enough for them to run, and they dropped, instead of dropping at the channel like what they were trying to do in 35, where they're trying to destroy the channel walls and have it essentially break out and bleed and slow itself down. This one was just, we're going to just bomb the vent itself and kind of see what happens. They had different reasons. I've seen different reasons stated for why they bombed the vent. One of them was they were just trying to actually plug the vent. The other one was, no, we were just trying to divert it as far upslope as possible, and that happened to be at the vent. Anyways, they decided to bomb the vent this time. And you can see here the lava flow in this photo going off to the right, and this impact area just offside of the vent. So yeah, they were just dropping them on vents essentially that are really close to, really upslope. And they, again, like in the previous one, it seems like they dropped the bombs as the eruption was already waning, and when it ended a few days later, they just claimed a lot of success. Now the thing about this one that's different is that you didn't have the pressure of the war. Right, so in this one, the pressure of the war, you have propaganda that you got to adhere to, you got storylines and all that. 1935, there was no force that was saying you got to report this to be a success or else it's going to hurt the war effort, right? In 42, that was kind of a thought, and we'll talk about some of the propaganda next. I mean, it's a really interesting thing to talk about the propaganda, because on one side of things, it's shutting down. On the Hawaiian front, it's shutting down the broadcast of this information. We don't want to tell the Japanese that there's an eruption happening, essentially. We want to keep all this hush-hush. We want to claim massive successes in everything that we do, especially when it involves the military and so forth. Meanwhile, the Japanese are going to do the opposite. They're going to spin it, and they're going to put it against the... They're going to use it to their benefit in their own propaganda. Now, how might that have looked? Right? So what I'll kind of end on is just look at some of the propaganda a little bit. This would be Tokyo Rose, and she's also known as Orphan Anne, and she was Eva Torguri, De La Quino. She was an American from Los Angeles that spoke perfect English and ended up getting stuck in Japan before the war broke out and then unable to return. So she turned into a propagandist, right, on the radio waves from Radio Tokyo.
Hello, Yankee brothers. This is your Japanese sister, the voice of truth. The Tokyo Rose reaches out to you from the peacefulness of Japan, laden as always with love, but today also with sorrow because of what your superiors are making you do. This morning they are forcing you to attempt the impossible.
Is that Tokyo Rose?
Brothers?
Yeah, I guess so.
The impossible.
And no accent.
For it is impossible for you to dislodge our forces on Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima?
That's why on this
She's got the
particular
straight
morning,
dope.
I am filled with sadness for you because of the thousands of Japanese soldiers safe in
Right, so that was generally her broadcast, and I've tried to look for the transcripts, but there's not transcripts for all the broadcasts. And Tokyo Rose was kind of like a pseudonym that a bunch of female radio personalities operated under. So even though it was they're claiming Tokyo Rose in some things, it might have been somebody else and not Orphan Anne, Eva. So there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff there. But there was a mention on Tokyo Rose from Tokyo Rose of the Mauna Loa eruption in 1942, basically congratulating Hawaii on the beautiful eruption. I don't have the transcript, so I had to make one as close as I could to that one, just to kind of give a sense of what that radio broadcast would kind of feel like after going through this. So again, using a little bit of AI trickery, here we go.
Hello, you fighting orphans in the Pacific. It's your favorite enemy, Orphan Annie. House tricks? We're just going to begin our regular program of music. But first I have something for you out of beautiful Hawaii. The spectacular eruption has been the talk of the islands as the U.S. Army attempts to stop its lava flows have faltered. How can this leadership, dear orphan fighters, mount the impossible challenge of dislodging thousands of our brave Japanese soldiers from their entrenchments when the ground they already stand upon proves too challenging? Reception okay? Why, it better be, because this is All Requests Night. And I've got a pretty nice program for my favorite little family, the Wandering Boneheads of the Pacific Islands. First up for music tonight, Bonnie Baker with My Resistance is Low.
Right, and that not a transcript. You know, the other one I did was an actual transcript. This one's not, but it kind of gives the vibe of what that broadcast may have been like, and just using the knowledge of the Mauna Loa eruption to the propaganda gain. And there was so much propaganda in this whole thing that the actual archives of these events get tainted with it, and we have incomplete information. It's really an interesting point in time. I really wish more information was available on much of this stuff. Even little things like there's pillboxes in Puna, right, from the World War II. Very little information on them, right? You go out to Shipman Beach Park out there, you make the hike, which takes a few hours, and just before you get to the beach, you find a concrete pillbox. And there's one in Opi'ikau, and there's other ones that I know of as well. And I've never found any documentation on these things. I've tried to find stuff, looked and asked guys, nothing on these things other than the briefest of brief mentions that they exist in some inventory or some work order form or something like that. They built them, but yeah, it's really bad information that's available. And then you'd find things like, USGS, when they went and did their new offices at just above Malka of UH Hilo, they went and did the environmental assessment, and they found old AA gun emplacements, trenches, and a bunch of other just leftover materials from World War II. This stuff is just out there. It's not well documented. I'm sure it's better on Oahu, but out here, it's pretty bare bones in terms of what you'll be able to find. And the things that were taking place, it seems like a lot of stuff didn't get written down. The stuff that did get written down got classified and then eventually got lost or something along those lines. But it really is not a lot of information about a very interesting time and some really cowboy stuff that was going on. After the eruption, after 42, the last attempt to bomb Mauna Loa was a test run, which was overseen by Lockwood in the mid-1970s, and instead of using those 600 pounds with 300 pounds of TNT, they, a couple decades later, the precision and the munitions and explosive power, all of that has gone up, so they used some 2,000-pound bombs to test. They blew some holes in the ground up on Mauna Loa, decided that it might not be the best way to divert, but it might be possible if you had the exact situation that you needed. And that was kind of the end of that. There's been no real attempts towards diversion on that front with the bombs. There were attempts made in 1960 with bulldozers, like a football team with full of bulldozers attempting to stop the 1960 Kapoho eruption and failing to protect the town to do so. We've thrown up against the eruption and attempts to divert several times, and most of them aren't wildly successful. Most of even if they claim to be successful, you start diving into them, they're not, essentially. Well, thank you for sticking with me. Let's see if we got any chats or any questions like that. And then we got some Blue sent a little bit. We had a super chat from Jennifer M. No message. Appreciate that. Yeah. All right. What's going on with the lava lake depth rising so much? Wasn't it going down a little bit? Lava lake depth? Yeah, we have a little at the end dropping down. Seems to be going on with the deflation that's going on. Yeah, not sure what you mean by the rise in lava lake level on that one. See if we got anything else. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Philip will be back later stuff, but yeah, it was a lot of cowboy stuff going on back then. A lot less nowadays. A lot more regulations, a lot more conservative approaches to these things, because back then it was just, just send it and see what happens. Just trying to get in chat. All right, appreciate everybody for tuning in today. Again, if you want to continue up this, Lou has posted Ben Hayes' talk on Midway Island and the Battle of Midway, which was one of the, if not the most crucial battle of World War II in the Pacific. It was maybe the second. It's hugely important, and there were so much little intricacies in that battle where 15-minute windows would just mean the difference between the war, essentially. Just incredible things going on in that battle. So I'd recommend checking that one out if you stuck with me through the end of this, and any of this stuff in here, like these bombs in the ground, interest you like they interest me. So I appreciate it. We will be back next week, Thursday, 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time, unless something happens. Philip will not be back next week either, so we'll figure out what we're going to be doing for there. I'm going to try and see if we can maybe get Ken Hahn on, the scientist in charge of USGS HVO, to talk about the latest happenings up there and talk about some of the nuances that I'm unable to discuss myself. So I appreciate it. Until next time, aloha.